to speech making and organization. An effective speech must be carefully developed, organized, and delivered after much practice and careful rehearsal. Okay, Lecture 7. The first step in is to choose your topic. Topics are determined by the occasion, the audience, and speaker's qualifications. Sources for topics are what you already know, what you're interested in and want to learn more about, as well as something that you hold strong opinions and beliefs about. The next thing you want to do is to determine the general purpose. You want to know why you're speaking. Okay? Is it to inform? Is it to persuade? Is it to entertain or to introduce? The general purpose always starts with the infinitive to. The next step in speech making is to narrow down and determine your specific purpose. The function of the specific purpose is to give the precise information the speaker wants the audience to know or believe after the speech. The specific purpose indicates what kind of a response you want from your audience. And when you're doing that, you need to focus on the clearly defined aspect of the topic. And you want to express it in a single infinitive phrase that includes the audience. Remember, the infinitive is to. Okay? So your specific purpose might be to inform my audience of 3 reasons why I'm annoyed by poor drivers. Okay, focusing clearly on the defined aspect of the topic. I'm annoyed, okay, by poor drivers. Okay? And it has to be expressed in a single infinitive phrase, and I told you the infinitive is to. That includes the audience. So it's to inform my audience, that's including the audience. Okay? Of 3 reasons why I'm annoyed by poor drivers. And the second thing that the specific purpose needs to do is indicate what you want your listeners to understand or believe or do. Okay? Indicates what you want your listeners to understand or believe or do. So the first thing you need to make sure your specific purpose does is indicate what kind of response you want from your audience, okay, as well as what you want your listeners to understand, believe, or do. Now, there's 5 tips for forming a good specific purpose. The first one is to write it as a full infinitive phrase, not a fragment. As I said earlier, to inform my audience of 3 reasons why I'm annoyed by poor drivers. Okay, you want to phrase it as a statement, not a question. Okay, don't ask a question in your specific purpose. You want to avoid figurative language. Remember, we talked about that in lecture 4, I believe, on language. You don't want to use jargon items. You don't want to use these things. You want to make certain that when you're talking to a broad group audience, you want to make sure that the language that you're using properly represents what it is you're trying to say. And it's no slang, no language that is figurative. Maybe somebody might not understand it. Okay, number four, you want to limit it, your limit your specific purpose to one distinct idea. Okay, not two ideas, one idea in your specific purpose. And you don't want to be too vague or too general. You want to ask yourself the following questions when you're forming a good specific purpose. Does it meet the assignment? Can it be accomplished effectively in the time allotted? Is it relevant to the audience? Is it too trivial for the audience? And is it too technical for the audience? Ask yourself those questions. Next thing we want to do in the speech making process is develop our central idea. Now, the central idea is a concise statement of what the speaker expects to say in the speech. Okay? It's more precise than the topic and the specific purpose. It sums up the speech in a single statement. Now, the central idea is also referred to as a thesis statement, and you may have heard that in your English classes. Same thing. The central idea or thesis statement must encapsulate the main points to be developed in the speech. It's what the speaker wants the audience to remember when they have forgotten everything else about the speech. And it reveals more about the content of the speech than does the specific purpose statement. So, if your specific purpose statement is, I, to inform my audience of three reasons why I'm annoyed by poor drivers, then your central idea that encapsulates main points might be similar to something like this. Uh, Three reasons I'm annoyed by poor drivers are that they are dangerous, they are inconsiderate, and they waste my time. Okay. So, main point number one being how dangerous they are. Main point number two being how inconsiderate they are, poor drivers are. And number three of my main points being um, how they waste my time. Okay, how poor drivers waste my time. So I am revealing more of the content of what I'm talking about than I did in the specific purpose, and I am stating it in a single sentence. So, with that being said, the central idea usually crystallizes late in the process because you have to know what your main points are, okay, and what it is you're actually going to say before you can actually put that main point together. So that usually crystallizes late in the process after you've gone through, developed your main point. Four criteria for a good central idea is or are expressed in a full sentence. Central ideas need to be expressed in a full sentence. Okay? Meaning it has a noun and a verb. Not in the form of a question. No questions. Central ideas cannot be stated as questions. They must be in a declarative sentence. They must avoid figurative language. Central ideas must avoid figurative language. Be clear. Say what you mean. And number 4, central ideas should not be too vague or too general. Speeches require strategic organization. Putting a speech together in a particular way to achieve a particular result with a particular audience. That's how you develop a strategic organization. Now, there's 3 steps to strategic organization. The first one is to determine the main point. The second one is to organize your supporting materials. And the third one is to organize your connective. Develop a strong sense of speech organization by gaining command of the 3 basic parts of a speech: the body, the introduction, and the conclusion. Now, you're going to start with the body. Now, you might think that you would start with the introduction, okay? But you don't, because you need to know what it is you are introducing. So you need to develop the body first before you can develop your introduction. Your body is the longest and most important part of the speech. Let's talk about determining the main points, the first of the 3 steps to strategic organization. When we are determining the main points, the first thing we want to make sure we're doing is selecting them carefully. You want to start with a specific purpose, and the main points should emerge once the bulk of your research has been gathered. Remember, we have to complete the main points first and know what it is we're talking about before we can introduce it. Okay, that's why that central idea crystallizes late in the process. You'll have a general idea in the beginning, but when you finally make that central idea, it's going to be after all that research has been done, and you know exactly what it is you're going to put in your speech and what you're not going to put in your speech. Because remember, this is a fluid document. You're going to be working on this. You're going to change it. You're going to have several different modifications. There's going to be information that you gather during your research that you're not even going to use in your speech because you're going to find it doesn't fit. Your speech may be too long now. You may not have you may have too much information for the time that is allotted for your speech. So you're going to have to figure out what it is you really want to say and really want to put in there and what you can take out. So, number 1, determining the main points. First thing you want to do is you want to select your main points carefully. What you started out with may not be what you end up with. Second thing you want to do when you are determining your main points is you want to phrase them precisely. There's 2 to 5 main points in a speech. Okay, that means no less than 2 and no more than 5. And if you have too many, you want to try to narrow them down to fit them into broader categories. Number 3, when you are determining the main points, is to arrange them strategically. Once established, decide what order to present them in your speech. Okay, and you want to determine the order. And the order depends on 3 things: the topic, the purpose, and your audience. When you are determining main points, you want to keep the main points separate. Okay, keep them separate. Don't put them together. Like to say your main point number one is I'm annoyed by poor drivers because they're dangerous and inconsiderate. No, those are two separate points, two separate main points. So you need to separate them. You want to also, when you are determining your main points, is you want to use the same pattern of wording. For example, you want to have main points that sound the same. Regular exercise increases your lifespan. Regular exercise improves your overall health. And main point number three, regular exercise controls your weight. You want to say it like that instead of saying main point number one, regular exercise increases your lifespan. Main point number two, sleep pattern improves regular exercise. Main point number three, it's impossible to help control your weight if you don't exercise regularly. See the difference? When you can, you need to use the same pattern of wording. It helps with retention and memory and understanding when you do it that way. Now, all speeches cannot follow this neat pattern, but try to when it's possible, when you actually can do it. Try to do it. When you are determining your main points, you want to balance the amount of time devoted to each main point. Meaning, if you spend 1 minute on main point number one, spend 1 minute on main point number two, spend 1 minute on main point number three. Now, speeches can't always follow this nice, neat, tidy pattern, but when you can, try to. Like, don't make it so obvious that you spend 30 seconds on main point number one and you spend 5 minutes on main point number two. Okay, you don't want to do that. The amount of time spent on each main point depends on the amount and complexity of the supporting materials for each point. Okay, the amount of time on each main point depends on the amount of complexity, the amount and the complexity of the supporting materials for each point. Meaning, if you have a lot of things um, to say, it's really going to depend on how difficult is it for your audience to understand what you're trying to say with these supporting, what you're trying to prove with these supporting materials. Okay, supporting materials must be relevant and accurate. We're on number two now. The first one was number one, determining the main point. Now we're on number two, organizing your supporting materials. Now, supporting materials must be relevant and accurate. They are the flesh that fills out the skeleton of your speech, okay, so to speak. Supporting materials are the flesh that fills out the skeleton of your speech. So if you have your outline, the supporting materials actually give it the meat to your message. They should be directly relevant to the main points they are supposed to support. Okay, so your supporting material needs to be relevant to the point directly above it. Like, you shouldn't be using supporting material that belongs in main point number one and main point number two, or it should specifically flow from what it is trying to support. Strong supporting materials provide for a more useful and appealing listening experience. Remember, we don't want that audience confused. Now, there's four major kinds of supporting materials. Number one is examples. Examples should be colorful, concrete, and active. Okay? Clear. Like we should be able to have a vivid picture in our mind when you give us an example. We should be able to have that picture in our head. Statistics is the second kind of major kind of supporting material. Statistics help to prove that the speaker has responsible knowledge of the subject matter. Okay? Having responsible knowledge of your subject matter, we're going to find helps to curb your anxiety about speaking. When you know what you're talking about, you have the facts or statistics to prove what it is you're talking about, you have more confidence. Okay, so statistics are facts and figures. Narratives is a third major kind of supporting material. Okay? Extended stories that should be short, to the point, and move naturally from beginning to end. Like, don't have tell a story. Make sure you tell it from the beginning to the end when you tell narratives, when you give narratives in your speech as a supporting material. And finally, the fourth type of the four major kinds of supporting materials is testimony. And testimony is expert knowledge. Expert knowledge. People who have actually done the research have lots of experience on the topic or subject matter. Testimony. Okay, number three is organize your connectives. Okay, definition of connectives are words or phrases that connect the ideas of a speech and indicate the relationships between them. Without connectives, speeches are disjointed and uncoordinated. So, connectives can be considered as the ligaments and tendons that join the bones and hold the organs in place, just as we talked about supporting materials being the flesh that fills in the skeleton. There's four types of speech connectives that we use. They are transitions, internal previews, internal summaries, and signposts. Now, transitions indicate when a speaker has just completed one thought and is moving on to another. They state both the idea the speaker is leaving and the idea he or she is coming up to. For example, now that you have a clear understanding of the problem, let me share the solution with you. Internal previews let the audience know what the speaker is going to talk about next. They are more detailed than transactions. Now, internal previews work just like the preview statement in a speech introduction, but it's located in the body. It's used to help listeners keep track of their ideas, and it's often combined with transitions. Okay, for example, now that we've seen XYZ, let's look at some solutions. I will focus on three solutions, A, B, and C. I will focus on three solutions, A, B, and C is your actual internal preview. But in this example that I gave you, it is combined with the transition. Now that we've seen the problem, let's look at some solutions. Okay? And then identifying the solution is actually the internal preview part of the connective. Internal summaries is the third type of the four major kinds of connectives. Internal summaries work as the reverse of an internal preview. They summarize the speaker's preceding points. And internal summaries remind listeners of what they've just heard. They're usually used when a speaker finishes a complicated or particularly important main point or set of main points. Internal summaries are an excellent way of clarifying and reinforcing your ideas, and they can also be used in combination with transition. As we've just seen, A, B, and C. Okay. Internal summary. And number four of the four major kinds of connectives is signposts. And signposts are brief statements that indicate exactly where you are in the speech, and frequently they're just numbers. First is, second that, third this. Now let's talk about five basic patterns of organization. They are chronological order, spatial order, causal order, problem solution order, and topical order. Chronological order follows time patterns. Okay? They may narrate a series of events in a sequence in which they happened. They may process or demonstrate how to do something. They are especially useful for informative speeches. Chronological order, time pattern. Spatial order follows directional patterns. They may proceed top to bottom, left to right, front to back, inside to outside, east to west, or some other route. They are especially useful for informative speeches. Spatial order. Causal order show cause and effect relationships. There's two main points that exist for causal order patterns. The first one is the cause of an event, and the second one is the effect resulting from the cause. Now, depending on your topic, you will either devote your first main point to the causes and the second to the effects, or vice versa. It's your preference. Causal order basic patterns are useful for informative or persuasive speeches. Problem solution order is the fourth type of the five basic patterns of organization. Problem solution order patterns show problem solution relationships. Again, two main points exist for this order: the existence of a problem and presenting a solution to the problem. Especially useful for informative speeches. Okay. Now, there's also another one that's just a variation of this, and it's called the problem call solution order. And I think you can understand where that goes, where you would have three main points. First one's problem, second one's cause, third one's solution. Okay. But for all intents and purposes, problem solution order is the fourth type of basic pattern of organization. And they are especially useful for informative speeches. And number five of the five basic patterns of organization is topical order. And topical order patterns of organization show categories. when the main points are simply part of the whole. So if it's not one of the above four orders, then it's topical. They are applicable to almost any subject and to any kind of speech. And topical order patterns of organization are used more often than any other method of speech organization. And that concludes Lecture 7, Steps to Speech Making and Speech Organization.